I wish that I could talk to actors in the beginning of their journey and say to them, okay, as hard as you feel like it is now, if I told you the more successful you become, the harder and more competitive it's going to become, are you still in? Or are you only in because you love it and you believe in the myth that the farther along you go, it will suddenly get easier?
Today, we have another Behind the Podcast episode with the reigning queen of acting podcasts, Audrey from Audrey Helps Actors. If you've been pursuing your acting career for 5, 10, or 15 years and want to hear from someone in a similar spot who has been getting traction in the industry, then you're going to love this episode with Audrey. Hey there, my name is Nathan Agan. This is the Working Actor's Journey, bringing you in-depth conversations with actors that have been working professionally for decades. I've come across a number of other great acting-related podcasts out there, all taking different approaches, and I want to share those with you. Last season, I chatted with Payden Follis of In and Out of the Arena, a roundtable-style show, and he's an actor based in Atlanta. I know I could just mention the title of the show and say, go listen, but I feel like I wanted to do more, to find out more of the story behind it, who's involved, and share that with you. I'm doing the Working Actor's Journey because I love hearing the story, so that's what this episode with Audrey is about too. And of course, as these hosts are connecting with and talking to lots of folks in the industry, they are exposed to a lot of great info. So that's what I want to tap into as well with this kind of episode. What have they heard over and over? What has the host learned about acting or the journey since they started their podcast? What are their favorite moments? Now, Audrey has talked with agents, casting directors, teachers, directors, actors of various levels, and covered so many different topics, including actor scams, finances, contracts, branding, and booking. I also thought this episode would be a great place to tell you that we have a new free guide to download. It's called 10 Ways to Stop Worrying and Start Working. Discover the mindset of working actors. Inside this online guide are 10 specific ways you can stop worrying and start working when it comes to being an actor. Hear thoughts, ideas, and advice from those who have been acting 40 plus years, taken from excerpts from past episodes. These guests do not know everything, nor is everything easy for them. They just have been around long enough to have figured out a few things, and they are sharing this with you. Get your copy of the guide now at workingactorsjourney.com/sign up, and there's also a link in the episode description and on the show notes. Audrey Moore is a Phase 3 actor, and you'll learn more about that. And her show is all about sharing the truth and reality of what it's like to be an actor right now, wherever you are in your career. Most actors are somewhere between getting their first headshot and winning an Oscar, and there's plenty to discuss for all those people. Think of our chat as a quick look at the kinds of things you'll hear more of on her show. The wonderfully named podcast Audrey Helps Actors is exactly what it sounds like. Every episode, Audrey invites someone from the business to chat about everything from advice for auditions and getting a new agent to the nitty-gritty of exploring different theatrical markets and information about how you can better use your union. The show is regularly in the top 100 of all performing arts podcasts in several countries. It's often been in the top 25, and as of publishing this episode, the show is in the top 50 for performing arts in the U.S. Pretty amazing. And she's not even releasing episodes right now. She's between seasons, and that's how popular the show is. Many of you may already be listeners and fans, but if not, get on that. Here's just a bit of what Audrey and I cover. Where the idea for her podcast started and looking at what had existed, why Audrey was doing so well in auditions but wasn't booking, how to find the problem you actually need to solve in your career, Audrey's own journey with horrible self-tapes, and how to manage your time and energy with various opportunities. Audrey even turns the table and asks me a couple of questions, which was totally unexpected and a lot of fun. I always love hearing the why and the story behind things, including with other podcasts, and it's a great bonus when these hosts are also actors. Now, if you're enjoying these episodes, I want to let you know you can also become a premium member of the show, and there are a number of different perks, including bonus episodes, exclusive opportunities, and more. Members can hear additional conversations with past guests Robert Pine, Don Didowick, Richard Reilly, and Tony winner Reed Birney. Head over to workingactorsjourney.com/premium to find out more and become a member. A special shout out to those at the co-star level or higher. Adam, Jeff, Robert, Ken, and Ralph. Thrilled that you all are members. So here's a little bit more about Audrey's journey. She studied at the Boston University College of Fine Arts and the London Academy of Dramatic Arts. In just over the last 10 years, she's racked up 20-plus on-screen credits, including recurring parts on the shows Manhattan, Godless, and Better Call Saul. She's not wasting any time, and it shows. I'm honored that Audrey is part of this, and I really enjoyed connecting with her. It's clear we have a similar goal: to share helpful info and the real truth of it all with actors out there. So here we go with a look behind the podcast Audrey Helps Actors. Please enjoy my chat with its host, Audrey Moore. I had spoken with Christine Aller about your show, and you know, she had kind of filled in some gaps because I didn't know you yet, and we were talking about other acting podcasts out there, and Inside Acting came up as something similar. But as they kind of trailed off, that's when your podcast really started to catch with people. And so it seemed like you were really, picking up the mantle in not a direct way, but like the audience that was really interested in that content suddenly had a new podcast to check out that went even to some degree, maybe even deeper about the specific acting bend. And so there's many questions I could ask, but I am curious why you decided to do the podcast and what was the turning point from idea to execution for you?
Great. Yes. I mean, for me, to talk about those guys in that podcast, I actually wasn't even aware of that podcast. It hadn't even occurred to me that there would maybe be acting podcasts out there. I checked theirs out. They actually had, I believe they had Gabrielle Carteris on in one of their episodes. And I was sort of, I'm like geek out for Gabrielle. So I looked at that episode. And so I think with their podcast, they were on the beginning end of their working actors journey. And I had the impulse a long time ago to be helping other actors. As I talk a lot about on the podcast. I've been doing some form of that for a really long time, whether that's taking actors out for coffees, just working on solutions, that sort of stuff. And now I just felt like it was really important that I reach a certain level of my own professional success so that I felt as confident as possible creating content that I was passionate about creating, which is really like solution-based content for actors. Sure. Everything that's out there for actors is either people who are famous and usually trying to like plug something that is really cool that they're doing, or it's like, how do I get my first headshot? And how do I get my first headshot is valuable to a lot of actors, but most actors that I know are sort of somewhere in between. I need my first headshot and I need to get an Oscar or I have my Oscar, right?
Right.
So that was really my interest is what about all of us? What about all the rest of us who've gotten our first and fifth headshots and are maybe making health insurance, maybe are just getting our first co-star, maybe have had our first series, and be able to address all of the issues along that whole scope from a working actor's perspective rather than from a publicity perspective, and also rather from a selling perspective. Another thing that I had realized is that a lot of actor podcasts were very much geared towards like, take my acting class or take my whatever. And, that's great. There is a lot of need for that. And what's great about podcasts is it's something actors are spending a lot of time in their cars. They're spending a lot of time on the subway. They're spending a lot of time commuting to auditions in some form. And podcasts there's my dog. And one of the things that actors of all levels need podcasts of all kinds, and some are inspirational and some are maybe, yes, go take this class and here's how to find some headshots that, I do or whatever. And all of that is fine. But I was really looking for a podcast that was just giving some like truth and some knowledge about really what it is that actors are up against, and in a business sense, not just in a creative sense. Everyone's teaching you how to be an actor. Everybody's teaching you how to act, but nobody's teaching you how to like make money as an actor.
Sure.
Nobody's teaching you how to like impinge the business. And it seems to be this like cloaked world that nobody really talks about. And then I felt like maybe nobody really knew also, like, maybe it's just a mystery. It will always be a mystery. But I started to see for myself that there were actual strategies that are just legitimate business things like, okay, well, you're in what's called a flooded market because there's like a 97% unemployment rate in your field and market. Well, that's actually like something legitimately concerning as a business person who's just trying to make profit off of something that you're selling. Is how do you make profit off of something that you're selling in a flooded market? Well, these are all like, I've come to realize, like very logical and very noble business concepts that nobody was really applying to the world of acting. And what I really loved about Christine's episode is that she talks a lot about like the myths that we're creating about being an artist and being an actor. And I so agree with that. These myths are created by publicity because we're trying to sell the American dream, which is that out of nothing, you too can be magic. You too can, basically be Harry Potter. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I hope that for everyone. I hope that you get plucked out of obscurity and become all that you are. But if you're not, first of all, I don't want actors to feel bad about that because that's actually the norm, not the exception. And along that journey to creating yourself as being Harry Potter instead of like somebody discovering that you are and then plastering you to be like rich and famous, that the journey becomes something that is understood and has a lot of camaraderie, a lot of empathy, a lot of possibilities of how to go about making your career as full and exciting and fruitful as it can be at any point in time, and really understanding what you can do to push it along, and then where you're more or less kind of helpless. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you're just helpless, and nobody loves feeling helpless. Nobody loves that. But I think at least just knowing that that's there, in my experience, can sort of take a lot of the shame that actors have around their careers, a lot of the frustration that they have around their careers, because if it's just out of your control, maybe you could just go about living your life doing what you love to do and control what's in your control surrounding your success and let go of what you can't control surrounding your success.
Yeah, those are great goals to have. And I think it's really, because this came from, I think to some degree it comes from a personal place of like, you want to know this and you want to be educated.
Totally.
And I think obviously some of the best projects come out of that space.
Right.
Yes. And, you weren't new to acting when you started the podcast. So I'm curious, how would you describe where you are in your journey right now? And I remember listening to the Patrick Fabian episode that you did,
yes.
and you talk about the kind of level 3, I think it was, that
yes.
Or level 4, people mm-hmm. are at and things like that. So, mm-hmm. And you can, if you want to use those terms, you can kind of unpack them a little bit more.
Them.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
But yeah, where do you feel like you're in your journey right now?
Great. I love that question. When I talk about levels, phases is what I call them.
Mm-hmm.
And that the phase 1 actor is the actor who's really just getting started to all the way, maybe like getting a co-star, maybe having their first commercial. They are anywhere from like, I just graduated to I'm just barely getting my toe into some real professional work that anyone would ever see or recognize, right? Phase 2 is a little bit more of that. So maybe instead of one commercial, you've booked a few commercials at this point. Maybe instead of, one co-star, you've got like 4 co-stars and maybe a guest star or maybe a couple commercials. You may have qualified here or there for, SAG health insurance. If you're in theater, you have maybe spent a few years now in various equity contracts, whether that's touring or, in New York City or wherever that is. So that's phase 2. Phase 3 is where you've got some project that has really landed you and the project recognition. Mm-hmm. So this is somebody who has maybe made health insurance and way beyond for a year or several. Mm-hmm. And this is somebody who isn't necessarily a household name, but all the other actors would consider this person to be successful.
Sure.
And if this actor were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, instead of the obituary saying like struggling actor or, aspirational actor, they would say actor living in such and such, you can be seen them on such and such shows, that would sort of be, what defines them. And then phase 4 is something that I'm looking at. And those are people that more or less, when I say their name, people know who they are, mm-hmm. So Patrick Fabian's a good example. My mom knows Patrick Fabian. She's a huge fan of Better Call Saul, but also Breaking Bad.
Sure.
And even if I would say, blah, blah, blah actor, Bob Schmo actor, my mom would be like, Bob Schmo actor, I don't know who that is. And I'd be like, oh, you remember that show they were on such and such? And they're like, oh, yeah, which one? Oh, so-and-so. And they're like, oh, yes. Mm-hmm. So more recognition. And those people are usually people that within the industry, Hollywood, the guests that you had at the, to end your season 2, right?
Right.
Like these are people that maybe you don't know their name, but within the industry, casting directors, producers, they all know who they are. Right. They have come to know and trust their work to some varying degree. So that's phase 4. And what I have discovered is, this leveling up from each level to level is extremely painful. And I compare it a lot to a video game of, I think there's this myth out there that I've spent my whole career on this myth. I have to tell you, I spent my whole actor's journey on this myth that the further up I went, the easier it would get for me. And instead, the further up I get, the more competitive it's gotten.
Really?
And
interesting.
That's a huge discovery. And I have not just my own stats to make that evident, but, I've had agents on, I've had other actors on who are successful, and they all say the same thing. And I think that if, along with myths that we could get rid of for actors, like that would be a really great one to get rid of. I wish that I could talk to actors in the beginning of their journey and say to them, okay, as hard as you feel like it is now, if I told you the more successful you become, the harder and more competitive it's going to become, are you still in? Or are you only in because you love it and you believe in the myth that the farther along you go, it will suddenly get easier? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so for me, I'm at this level. I would call myself a phase 3 actor. I've had a lot of really successful projects that I've been in, and around town, if I tell people who my agents are, people know who that is, sure. Right? Yeah. And casting directors, I have relationships with them. When I go and talk to my agents, if they were to say, what casting directors do you have relationships with? I wouldn't be like, I don't know. I could like actually list, casting directors who know me and like my work and bring me in consistently, even if they haven't been able to cast me in a project that's right for me yet.
Right.
So that's where I'm at. And to give an example of the competitiveness of that, I remember when I started auditioning, at the point where I started auditioning for guest stars. So guest stars, for maybe your listeners who are baby actors, they are the larger supporting roles in a TV show. Mm-hmm. So not the one lines,
right,
but like the 3 scenes, mm-hmm. right? When I started auditioning for those and I was, still getting called back, was getting called back into the office, was doing quite well, but would never hear, or I would go to the audition, I would kill, I would slay, and they would just love me and be very vocal about how much they love me. And then I wouldn't hear anything. I wouldn't hear that I was pinned. I wouldn't hear that I was called back. I wouldn't hear, but they would keep bringing me back into the office. So I knew that I was doing a great job.
Sure.
And I called a friend of mine who is a little bit ahead of me in her actor's journey. And I said, what's happening? And she said, oh, they offered it out. And I said, what do you mean they offered it out? She said, well, that's what happens is, and this was like horrifyingly shocking to me. She said, every guest star I go out for, I know that they've offered it out. And the only reason I'm going to get that guest star is because the person they offered it out to declined the job. And I was like, oh shit. And I just had never thought of that. And so now I wasn't just competing to get the role. As far as acting was concerned, I was competing with people who didn't even have to do any acting to get the role.
Right.
They already had a resume and an agent that supported that, right? So that's an example of it getting more competitive. And even if I have a friend who, started auditioning for series regulars, and she was like, and I was amazing. And then, I didn't hear anything and I couldn't believe it because I was so amazing. And I said, oh, well, they offered it out. And she said, but it's on this little shit network. Like, who cares? Who would want that show? And I was like, nobody's like, I don't want a series.
Right.
Nobody's like that. Everyone's like, I want a series. So even if it's on like some little shit network, if they're going to offer it to them, they'll take it. So I would say where I'm at now is in this very interesting creative space of having to be more than ever really passionate about doing the work for myself, regardless of the results that are out of my control. Mm. And that I may have, a series, I may have guest stars, I may have, great reps, I might have great execution, but I may be competing with people who have Emmy Awards.
Right.
I may be competing against people who have been cast members of Saturday Night Live.
Right.
Right. And that's hard to compete against. And so I just have to be as incredible as I can be for me.
And, something I wanted to ask about, you said in that phase 3, you might have a project that has garnered some attention and all that. And you mentioned that, I think you said you would listen to the episode with Gabrielle Carteras on Inside Acting. Mm-hmm. And, what's kind of interesting, a parallel between Gabrielle and yourself is, Gabrielle becoming, when Ken Howard passed away, the president of SAG-AFTRA. We'll
yes,
just kind of jumped right to that. Like that certainly raises her profile in the industry. It may not be a direct acting job, but everyone is suddenly much more aware and is much more aware of her name because of that. And similarly, you have your podcast, which is not a direct acting job, but you have now raised your profile. And even if, and of course, like we're in this age now of YouTube stars and things like that, where it's like, conceivably somebody could cast you because of the podcast or bring you in because of your Instagram following or, things like that, where it is an interesting time that, in that phase 3, you don't need to have a network series as the thing that raises your profile and raises your credibility in the industry. And so I was just curious if you feel like, that has that been the biggest thing to date that has really helped your career move forward, the podcast, or do you feel like it's just another spoke in the wheel?
it's hard to measure because I now only live my life as a life who has the podcast as an addition.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have nothing to compare it to. I will say that I'm very strict with myself about the podcast, and even in coming on to other shows for other podcasts such as this, because I really am keeping my acting as my main priority.
Right.
That's really important to me. And I think I'm really supported in that by the listeners, because I believe my greatest value to the listeners is an actor who continues to keep working steadily.
Of course. Yeah.
And continuing to level up in my own journey and bring new perspectives and new guests on as I go along that journey, right? So that's my first priority. And if the podcast ever seems to get in the way of that priority, I'm always telling my husband, like, I'll end the podcast tomorrow. Like, I'll quit it tomorrow, right? I'm doing it really and truly, for a few reasons. One is to continue to hone in my voice, because I've realized that what really makes actors pop is a really strong sense of self, and then being able to bring that strong sense of self to the work.
Sure. Yeah.
And what is unique about what you bring. And the podcast, I will say, artistically, one way it's really helped is it's really clarified what that is for me. It's clarified what people find valuable about me, and also what some people find intolerable about me, which is also equally valuable.
I think your intros are phenomenal because,
thanks.
Regardless of the content or the style, I feel like this is Audrey. Now,
yes,
you may have created the character who does your intros, and that's totally your prerogative. Like, a lot of actors have done that before you. But I am very impressed with how, I'll just use this kind of marketing speak, on brand those intros are. Like, they're really great.
Thanks. No, it's definitely, I'm not putting on a character. That's just a little piece of me, And
which is great. I mean, that's the easiest character to play.
Absolutely. And what I know about this business is that one of the ideal situations to find yourself in as an actor is one where you're inspiring the writers, and then they're inspired to write for you, and then you're inspired by what they've written for you, and then they're inspired. And that's how you get the greatest performances of all time, is this beautiful collaboration, cohesiveness between the creators writing for you and then you, the actor, executing what they've written. Yeah. And so the more I can get awareness of what I bring that is exciting to people, and like I said, even if it's, people don't like that part of me, or they don't like that expression of me, that's okay too, because a lot of characters aren't likable. A lot of characters people can't tolerate. And so if I get something like that, I know I can, bring that to the forefront for something.
Sure.
So artistically, that's been really valuable. And then I would say, in a business sense, it's a lot of time and a lot of energy that I'm putting towards this thing. Because I felt very much that actors are being lied to, and that there's a lot of publicity and not a lot of, like, in the trenches truth happening.
Sure.
And that a lot of the people telling us what's going on aren't really the people working anymore. And that's not bad. I don't think that's to knock them at all. It's just to say that maybe the people that we're learning our acting from shouldn't be the same people we're learning our how to break into the business from.
Right, of course, yeah. And I think, I would say probably almost all of my guests would be the first ones to admit to say, I came in 30 or 40 years ago. Like, I am totally aware it's a new industry, and,
it's a new game.
Right. And, there are certainly some things like the psychological stuff, that never goes away. And how you deal with the fear of rejection and the insecurity, like that is always present. So like, that's what I'm excited to, talk about and learn from. I mean, in any industry, people that have been doing it for 60, 70 years, like, you're going to learn something. But yes, they're the first ones to recognize, like, it's a whole new ball game out there.
A whole different game. Yeah. And I think that's great. And I also think that as it's helped to maybe assist in my career, just in my name and face being out there more, I think, maybe so far, the show's actually relatively new, despite how popular it is. It may be too early to tell, but I do think that I bring now with myself a reputation of a certain work ethic, a certain standard of work. And when that is preceding you hopefully show up more to fulfill that.
Right.
It's harder to hide.
Well, that people are primed to know that you are a professional. And I mean, really,
That's right.
like that's what most people are looking for. It's like, we know she's going to show up, do her work, and is going to be professional. Yes. Like that's right. That's what people are looking for.
Yeah. One of my agents who took a hiatus to have a baby, I went and visited her and a baby not too long ago. And she said it to me in a way that I thought was so fascinating, because she was talking about my booking ratio, which is a very good booking ratio, meaning number of times I audition versus how many jobs I book. And she said, you can't argue with that booking ratio. And I was like, oh, well, thanks. And she goes, well, you're really good at your job. And I was like, oh, and I just feel like actors don't have that perspective.
Yeah.
Like, you're good at your job.
Right.
And
that's a metric that you can actually look at, as opposed to like, oh, I really enjoyed you in that scene or on that, and that,
right.
It's like, no, this is quantifiable.
Yeah. I think the more I work on it, this podcast, the more I talk to actors, the more I see opportunities for us to just be more informed. And in so doing, I get more informed,
right.
Which is fantastic. And I can sort of adjust what I need to ingest, often by seeing others.
Right. Right. The other part of my brain wants to chime in and go, okay, I just said this booking ratio is quantifiable. And yet at the same time, there are many cases where you, as you even illustrated, you go into casting offices over and over and over, and you may not be booking anything, but you're developing a really great relationship. So you may not have that high booking ratio because there are so many other factors that go into why you are cast. But certainly something you can point to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do caution actors about leaving it off the table.
Yeah.
I really believe that most actors are really terrible at auditioning because we haven't been taught to audition. The conservatory education that I received was one wherein we weren't even allowed to audition for anything for the whole time that we were in school.
Oh, wow.
You were cast in things based on the people knowing your work, and then they would just cast you in it. And I think that's a tremendous disadvantage, since the way that you're going to then book the job is through the audition. And if you are auditioning for 50 things and you're getting 0 bookings, to me, that's a bad ratio.
Sure, of course, yeah.
I just think that your numbers don't lie.
Right.
And if like the standard is 1 out of every 20 is doing really well, then if you're booking 1 out of every 20, congrats. And also to know, too, if you have a standard of understanding that numbers don't lie in a positive way, too. I'll talk with actors all the time who will say, like, I'm just having, like, such a terrible year. Like, I had, only 5 auditions this year, and I booked 3 of them, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait, let's pause. So you had 5 auditions this year, and you booked 3 jobs. So to me, those are really great stats.
Right,
and you don't have an audition execution problem. You have a getting more auditions problem. Right. And then that can help you to know what problem you really need to solve.
That's great.
As opposed to trying to solve the problem of, I need to book more jobs. I'm not good at booking jobs. It's like, no, you need to get more auditions so that you can book those jobs.
And this is exactly what you were talking about, because this information of how to be a business person as an actor is so missing and lacking from the education.
So
but, if you are an entrepreneur, what you are saying makes absolute sense. It's like, oh, right, I need more leads. Like that's
it.
That's what it is. But as actors, we're not educated about that. It's like, right, but if you ask any startup person or entrepreneur or
Absolutely.
coach or whatever, they're like, yeah, I need to get more leads. It's like, yes.
Yeah.
Because when you're good at closing, once you get people on the phone, you can get them to buy your product or service or whatever, but you need more people in the door, and actors don't know that.
Oh my God, I just love everything that you just said because it's so exact. And I think for me, I love to explain it in other terms, because I think when it's about acting, it's so personal to all of us, because to be an actor, you have to be such a personal, emotional person. But when you can sort of say, oh, it's not that, like in business, it's this, it's like, oh shit, it's just the same thing. A really good example of that is a friend of mine was talking about, all the job postings that they do, like on, Monster and all that sort of stuff. And he was like, all that, because he works at this company, he's like, all that's bullshit. It's just so that, HR can say like, no, we looked for diversity. No, we looked for people outside of our friends. So they do a certain number of auditions, basically, which are, let me see your resume. Let me garner your resume. Let me get your submissions from Actors Access or Breakdown Services, right? Because we looked. Oh no, we looked. We tried. But at the end of the day, he said, the person's that's going to get the job is always going to be somebody within the company recommended. It just always is. And I was like, oh shit, it's offered out. And they said, they'll bring you into the interview even. They'll even give you a second interview. But the whole time, it was never your job. It was Carl's friend, Susan, who was going to get the job. Right, the whole time. Right. It was only ever going to go to Susan.
Yeah.
And you don't know that. And so you get your interview and you're like, yeah, nailed it. And then you get your second interview, you're like, boom, nailed it. And then you don't get the job. And watch a normal person who doesn't have an acting career get a second interview and then not get the job, and watch the immediate chaotic emotional destruction that happens to them for like the next 4 weeks. And you'll feel so much better about how you're handling your acting career because you realize like that's the normal way to behave.
Right.
Is to put a lot of work into something, get really close, and then nobody cares to give you a fuck about why it is that you did or didn't get it.
Right.
Yeah, that's maddening.
Yes.
For all of us.
Yeah,
and so that to me gives us such perspective and then makes it all a little bit less significant.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know we could talk for hours about all this stuff, which is great. I want to give people, if they've never heard your podcast, just a couple, kind of quick ideas and some of your feedback from doing the show. So one thing I'm curious about is, what is something that you've learned or been reminded about acting or the journey of acting since starting your podcast?
Everyone's terrible at self-tapes.
Oh.
Everyone is atrocious at self-tapes. Self-tapes, they're just all terrible. It's been so fascinating to see. And, I learned this through talking to casting directors, and it's this thing. There are actually self-tapes that casting directors pass around to each other as like the great God gifting self-tapes. It's just they don't share them publicly, right?
Yeah.
And when you see what a self-tape is internally, that really stands out. And then you see everyone else's self-tape. You're just like, oh my God. And I would say as self-tapes become more and more the standard, really understanding what makes a self-tape pop, I think you have to experiment. And I would say to all actors, if you watch your work and you are bored by your work, that's correct. It's boring.
Yeah.
If you watch your work and you feel like it's kind of one note, that's correct. It's one note. Whatever you see, it's not just because you're seeing it because you're making up stories about yourself, because I understand it can be hard to watch yourself, but you got to get better at that anyway, because that's what we're doing now. But generally speaking, whatever you see is what also they're going to see. And it's, I know, a hard thing because perfectionism is real, and you just feel like, oh my God, well, when I'm supposed to spend like 40 hours on a self-tape? And what's really unfortunate is, one person raises I don't know, is your podcast explicit?
Because it already is now.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So I've already dropped the bombs already. That's all I do, you guys. If somebody raises the fucking bar on you, and then that becomes the standard, and then you have to raise the bar, and it's not fair, but that's what happens in a competitive marketplace, is somebody raises the bar to stand out, and then now that is the standard that you have to hit. And it sucks, and it's usually pretty expensive, and it's often expensive without any reason of why you don't get a return on your investment. So at the end of the day, I say, like, actors will pay a bunch of money to go be great in acting class. But then they get an audition where they don't even actually have to pay necessarily to be great. It's just the cost is just the time, which is the same amount of time you're putting into acting class anyway. And suddenly they get really angry and really crappy about their attitude. And then their work suffers. And I think just put the amount of love into that work that you would put if you were going to pay an acting teacher to give you an evaluation, but without paying the acting teacher to give you an evaluation.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I know one of the cool things as an observer was to see the whole self-tape campaign you did on Instagram. And it was just
Self-tape May.
Yeah, it was really exciting to see how many actors got on board with that. And because it's, I was just watching that Brene Brown special on Netflix, and she talks about all about vulnerability and talk about here I'm going to put some probably crappy work out there for anyone and everyone to see, probably even potential casting directors to see, my work. But that's what you got to do. Like, that's the only way you're going to get better is putting in the hours. So I'm just, I'm a big fan that you did that. I think it's really, really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that was so cool because I didn't even think it would turn into what it was. I was just like, that's when I started doing my self-tape regimen. For the people who don't know my journey, I spent 2 years putting myself on tape, as an exercise Monday through Thursday for 2 years.
Wow. And
I learned sides at night, and then I would give myself one take during the next day. And because I wasn't good at auditioning, and I could see that was a missing piece that needed to be fixed. And so I just did the work. Like exactly what you're saying, I need to do the hours. So I just sort of was like, let's do self-tape May, because May is a depressing month in the business. I was like, let's just do it. And I didn't give everyone like a lot of lead up. I was like, self-tape May is happening. Like, I've talked about this, even though I really hadn't. I was like, let's do it. And then people got on board. It was so exciting. And then what was so funny is then suddenly like self-taping companies started using it for their own profit. They were like, are you taking advantage of self-tape May? Like, blah, blah, blah. Come here and do self-tape May. We're a self-taping service and we'll do your self-tape May. And I was like, okay, I see how this grows. So I was so proud of everyone. I have to say, I know how hard it is. A lot of people are coming home for work, but I think the best thing that people learned was, do you have a life that's set up to receive and execute auditions really to their fullest ability? Because if you are working until 11 o'clock at night, and if you're in New York till 2 o'clock in the morning, and you are at work and you get an audition at 7:15, that's 6 pages, and the audition is at 11, do you have a life set up to book jobs?
Right. Yeah, no, it can be a real good wake-up call. And I love that, once again, this idea came out of something personal, that it was like, I need to be better at this. And then having that observation or awareness of, I think this might be helpful for other people, or I get the sense it's going to be helpful for other people. So that's great. What is, and I'm sure you've had many favorite moments over the podcast, but can you think of one that happens to stand out for any reason, whether it was funny or crazy or sad or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite episode is the episode I did with Laura Spencer. For those of you who don't know her, she was on Lizzie Bennet Diary. She was on Bones. She was on Big Bang Theory. A very successful actress who underwent a very personal tragedy. And I've gone through a lot of my own personal tragedies. And, being a freelancer, which is essentially what an actor is, you can't take like a few months off for like grief, like if you have a job, right, at like a company, you actually can file for, I think it's called like grievance time or something like that. Okay. And, you basically like can say, I have to go take time off of work to go grieve.
Right.
Which is something that then you can't be fired by, and you actually get, some like financial assistance to go through. And when you're freelance, you don't get to do that. And, millennials are all freelance, right? There's like 5 millennials who are working for a company. And then if you're an artist, you absolutely get none. You don't get that as an option.
Right.
And if you're waiting tables, you don't get that as an option. You just get off the schedule and nobody's going to pay you. Right. So we just talked about that, and we talked about the discussions I really like are when we really get into like what this career path really costs, not just financially.
Yeah.
And we just had, I think, a really beautiful, open conversation about loss in general, and then about how that can affect your career and your artistic unfolding. And I'm, to this day, really grateful that she came on to share that.
That's awesome. That's great. Because, I mean, it's something else that all of us are going to experience at some point, and how does that, yeah. It's
a part of the package, right?
Right.
It's a part of the life package, just like finance is a part of the life package.
Sure.
We got to be I'm so glad you had her on talking about money. And then also, grief and loss. It's a part of the package.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah. I hope people check that episode out. I think it sounds like a really great place to start, with your show. We were talking about the phases earlier, and if you try to think back to when Audrey was in phase 1, what's one thing you wish you had done when you had begun your career? You sound like a really good self-starter and someone that, looks at, okay, what do I need to do? But is there something you look back and go, man, I really wish, I guess maybe when you had come out of your conservatory training, just going, I wish I had been doing this.
I wish I had guidance. I think that's why I have the podcast. I just wish I had guidance. We were all just like blind fish swimming into each other in the water.
That sounds like sperm, Audrey. I think,
right, yeah.
We've really we've gone explicit,
exactly,
really.
Exactly. So fast. That's what I do. I go explicit. I came out of college. I had a real personal tragedy. My father was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer about 2 weeks after I graduated from college. He died 5 months later. I moved home to take care of him and watch him die. And then I moved to New York City. Ta-da! And so I was already marred by a level of trauma that I don't think that, I don't think it's realistic for me to think that I could have or should have done anything different or better than I did. And I really feel that so many of us, and myself included, I will do as best as I know how to do. Tell me how to do it. Tell me how to do it the best. Tell me how to work. Tell me how to find my way in. You don't have to tell me my way in, but at least tell me how to find my way in. And even if it's like your way in is going to be when that trend changes. And here's some truth about trends. Okay. Now, right? That to me is at least helpful information. And I don't and can't really regret any of the moves that I made. I really only regret not having somebody within the business who had the time and ability to authentically lead me from mine to mine, so I didn't explode.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all just need that.
Yeah.
And I remember being so angry because, I knew that there were actors out there that were just a little older and were working. And I remember just thinking this is stupid that we don't have mentorships. This is stupid that people aren't because acting's one of the few businesses where I'm not competing against people older than me.
Right.
The way that casting works, I'm competing against people who look like me.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I see no reason why somebody 10 years ahead of me in the journey couldn't do that. And that's really the true advantage of being second generation, is not really even just the connections, but the fact that somebody can save you so much time because they're like, oh, don't do that.
Right. Right. It's funny. I think probably 10 years ago or so, I had the idea of, and I knew kind of why it didn't exist, but I was like, I really wished there was an acting internship program that existed. And I was thinking God, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to go onto a set of a TV show, as an intern, to shadow the actors on there, just so you knew what was going on and what the day was like. And, you know, I could quickly think of like why they don't want other actors on the set. But it's like, you know, so many of us spend so much time and energy just trying to get to the set.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what is going to greet us when we get there. And so, and unless you've taken a job like on craft services or film permit, look at, you know, and you have some film set experience from doing something else, it's, you know, but you're right. There's just such that gap exists. So whether it's, you know, a mentorship or internship or something like that, that it's like, yeah, why isn't there more support? Or you would wish that there is something. But like you said, I think your podcast is filling a really great need and, you know, is doing, you know, part of that work short of, you know, taking people to sets and going, here's what this is like. Here's what this is like. You know, it's really great to hear from somebody, as you said, who's currently working, who's talking to other working professionals from, you know, different parts of life that, I'm really thrilled that your podcast exists.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I'm so happy about it is that I hear from people that I consider to be phase 4 actors. And they are like, oh my God, I love your podcast. I listen to it all the time. And then I hear from people who are like, I'm graduating from college this month and I'm so glad that I found your podcast. Yeah. I'm about to move to LA and, you know, little bitty baby actors and everything in between. And I think that's really exciting to me because it means that I'm addressing enough issues that everyone can get something out of it. And also, you know, when you talk about like phase 3, phase 4 actors, you know, those actors aren't usually even in class anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so you can miss that sense of community. And, you know, if you're not doing theater, you know, you're coming onto a set and then you're leaving. And what I hear from people is that the podcast gives them the sense that they used to get in class of like, oh God, I'm not all alone.
Right.
Like, oh gosh, yeah, you're going through that too. Oh yeah, that's how that is, right?
Yeah. Or even if you're in a market where there isn't a lot of work and there aren't a lot of creatives around you, and you're you're biding your time to get to a better market. You know, again, you have this community, you know, in your ears of like, okay, all right, I hear my tribe, I hear these people.
Yes. Or if I moved to LA from New Zealand, that's what it sounds like. That's what it really is like. It's not all like I show up and they just roll out the carpet. And it's also not like everyone's just going to spit at you on the street. Like, what is it really?
Right.
What is the expectation?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your show. Like it is such an honor for me to connect with you, and I'm constantly admiring and impressed by what you're doing with your podcast, and just it's really, really awesome. And so I'm grateful that you had the time to talk today, and if I can direct any of my listeners to what you're doing, I think it's great.
Great. I feel the same way. You know, I think the more actors have out there to listen on their way to auditions, to people talk about the business from inside the business, I think the better that is for all of us. Yeah. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And I appreciate, you know, all of us who are sort of coming together, I would say, as like a new generation of informants. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
To come out and pull the curtain back.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's a cliche term, but it's an exciting time where like the old guard doesn't exist and anyone can have a platform and share what they want. And, you know, it is very exciting that there are a lot of people and in the acting space, you know, sharing great information like this, and it's not left up to a few individuals through established means. You know, it's Audrey has a microphone, and here she's going to tell you what she thinks, and it's great.
Right. Well, and hopefully not just me.
Right.
Like, I have people who've gotten on from all areas, and I'm like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you went that route. Oh, I went this route. And they were like, oh, I hated the route you went, so I went this other route. You know, and I think it's so valuable to have all those perspectives. I do have. I know you've been asking me a lot of questions, but I do have one question for you.
Sure.
As an actor journeyman, do you have any questions for me?
That is a great question. You know, one of the things I struggle with, and I've struggled with for years and years, is having, and this may sound horrible, but having too many exciting projects to do. And when you have too many exciting projects, you can feel stretched thin, and you may not feel you're getting the traction on the projects you want. And so whether that's, in acting work or a podcast or any other creative endeavor you're doing, and for a lot of other people, it could be like, well, I also want to do this web series and I also want to do this, whatever.
Yes.
And so I'm always almost like delighted when I see people who seem to have figured out how to focus on something. And I guess I would ask how, and by the way, I love the clarity that you spoke with earlier of saying, well, if this interferes with my acting, I'm done with it. Right. Because to me, that's almost like a very ballsy thing to say of like, man, she has this podcast that's doing really well and people, it resonates with people and that's amazing. And, she certainly seems like she enjoys it on some level. It's not torture.
I love it.
But that she could just be so clear of like, yeah, if it gets in the way, it's gone. And I think a lot of us, myself included, are, I don't know if it's like hardwired or hungry for, especially in a creative field, like you're just hoping you do something that resonates with people. Like, in a larger context, it's like you want to do something that matters, because I think that phrase people know, but it's like, and so I'm always impressed with people who I perceive that, wow, they found something that resonated with people. They found something that matters to other people. And yet they could be so clear about ending it because it's not their personal goal. But so there's probably a number of questions in here, but I'm always curious is how do you figure out, or what's your criteria for what you are working on? Because I'm sure even maybe since the podcast have started, there may have been other opportunities that have come your way that other people want you to be part of, that you have to decide, you know what, this isn't part of my plan, or this isn't part of my goals, or Audrey, you say like, look, I only get 2 projects at a time, and one is acting and one is podcast, and that's it. Or so I'm curious. That would be my question: is how do you manage that?
Yeah, I feel like you're actually asking kind of 2 questions, and they're sort of coming into one. So one is what I would say is like, how do you not spread yourself too thin amongst too many passions in a way that then sacrifices the integrity and the success of one of the passions? That's one question. Okay. And then I would say the next question is more what you sort of got to, which is then how do you time manage around those priorities? Right. So for me, I would say, I think what most artists and actors and people are actually really seeking is a feeling of empowerment. What we do is very disempowering. And actors are really guilty of finding other things to temporarily feel empowered by until that thing gets successful enough where then it starts to feel disempowering. And then they will return to their focus of acting. So I call that like passion hopping, basically. So this is an actor who is maybe in phase 1 and they maybe need to just get better at auditioning, but instead of getting at better auditioning, they feel disempowered with their results in auditioning because it's disempowering because they're not good at it. They're not good at it because they're bad people or bad actors. They're not good at it because no one gave them the hours and the instruction to be good at it.
Sure.
But it's really hard to be really good actor and then be not really good at auditioning. It feels very disempowering. So then what they do is they passion hop over to say, I'm a writer. I'm going to write my own projects. What I want to do is I want to write my own projects. I'm a writer. I'm a writer actor. I've always liked writing and I can write and I'll do that. And then they hang out with their friends and they write and they get some ideas going and then it gets exciting and then it gets to sort of a place where then they have to sort of do something with it for it to then turn into money. And then they make the unfortunate discovery that that's as hard, if not harder, than the acting. And it's often very expensive. And then they go, oh, this writing thing, it's like a racket and it's all full of bullshit and whatever. I'm an actor. You know what I need to do is I need to get better at auditioning. I'm going to go and I'm going to take this audition class. I'm going to work on my auditioning. And then they get to auditioning and then maybe they get better. And then maybe they book one job. And then after booking that job, they think something's going to change for them because they thought after one job things would change. And then it doesn't the way that they expected it to. And so what they really need to do is get more auditions to get more jobs, but they have to figure out how to do that. And that's very disempowering. So they're like, you know what? I'm a director. I'm going to go direct. I'm direct something.
Yep.
And they hop over that passion. And then they discover that directing is a really expensive endeavor that requires a lot of skill, and people go to school for years for that endeavor. And they might take the script that they wrote back when they were on the passion of writing, and they might start to think about directing it. And they look at all these examples of people who are like multi-hyphenates, and they use that to inspire them until it really gets to the point of it really being hard again. And nobody cares about what they're directing. And maybe they get into a few festivals, and then it feels like maybe they just give a lot of money away so that people could throw a festival and take a bunch of artists' money. And then they feel disheartened, and then they go, I'm an actor. And they hop back over to acting. And I see people do that for a really long time. And I think that you have to just check your intention. Is your intention truly to tell this story that you want to write, or is your intention, I'm really frustrated by acting, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go seek empowerment somewhere else, when really maybe what you need to do is seek your empowerment through getting through the struggle of the next phase of growth in your acting. And there's lots of science on that, and the science says that it sucks, but the reward is very clear, that you have to sort of get through that. So to me, having an intention of like, what do I really want? Like, what's really exciting to me? And what I really want is a very full, very engaged acting career where people seek me out and are excited to have me be a part of their project, and are really excited in me being a part of their collaboration and what I will bring to their story and to the table, and a co-creative collaborative exchange between me and all the creatives of the other actors and the wardrobe and the makeup and all that. That is like sharp as a nail, is the sharp as a samurai sword. That is my greatest intention.
Yeah.
And so then, as far as managing my time is concerned with a podcast, it's easier for me to then do what you're really talking about with time management called boundary setting, right?
Yeah.
So I set boundaries because I've learned how I work, and I know that I need to have a lot of energy for my work. That's just how Audrey is.
Yeah.
Because when my attitude suffers, my approach suffers, and my attitude suffers when I don't have enough energy. So if I'm giving all my energy away to other things, even if it's a podcast or if it's, public speaking engagements, or my reps, like to whatever degree they like see green with a podcast and they want to run and go with it. Right. And I have to just like have a conversation with myself of like, I am not here to be a master podcaster. I'm here to be the actress I desire to continue to grow to be, and get paid very handsomely for that, and do work that is very exciting to me. And then I will have this podcast wherein I will share upon that journey and bring others to share upon that journey, so others can hopefully get along that journey easier than I did. And I'm not here to dominate the podcast world. And it can be sneaky. I'll be like on Instagram and I'll see somebody's like starting another acting podcast. And I'm like, oh God, sorry, starting another acting podcast. And I feel like competitive suddenly. And like, how do I get it? And then it's easy for me in the sense though, that I really believe that my value is in being a working actor. And that if I let go of my pursuit of continue to expand my working actorness, that I will be cutting off my nose to spite my face. And I will kind of create this acting podcast that then becomes an echo chamber that I find in a lot of acting classes of just a lot of like self-congratulation and a lot of commiserating and all of that, as opposed to with a focused intention of information, empathy, and camaraderie. So I would say a really focused, sharp intention helps to decide what is noise and what is actually something that you want to give your time to.
Yeah, that's great. It like many things, it is not easy work, to come up with that intention and to hold yourself to it. But that's great. Thank you for all of that. I really appreciate you responding on the fly with such
of course,
articulate and eloquent thoughts.
Thank you. I really, you're an actor too, and Audrey helps actors, and so I'm always looking to see when you reach out to me. I'm interested in, okay, beyond just another podcast you're talking about acting,
right?
Like, what is your interest?
Yeah,
what is, you could say, what's your intention?
Right. Yeah, I discovered, about myself, I have such a deep desire to create. But of course that could take, any 1,000 number of ways.
Yes.
And I'm not someone intimidated by the tools,
Yes.
So it's like, okay, well, is that going to be video editing? Is it going to be audio editing? Is it going to be writing? Is it going to be podcast? There's no limit. And of course, any one of those things can lead you down to 14 other projects. So there's no barrier anymore.
What I love about that though, is like what you're actually kind of saying to me is like, you geek out on learning.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm very enthusiastic about like new ideas. And as a result, I'm also the kind of person that like, as soon as I learn something that has really helped me or like made a difference, there's kind of this boomerang effect where it's like, I got to get this back out there into the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And to me, I feel like so many people have like a part of themselves that is who they are, and no need to fight that in an idea that you need to be like somebody else. Right? Because I think if like what brings you real joy is geeking out about learning and exploring newer and newer avenues, then it's your life experience. So go geek out and experience joy in learning new things. And if maybe that doesn't equate, the financial remuneration of Steve Jobs, that's fine, because all that's really just consumerism and all that anyway. And what Steve Jobs really was excited about was creating new ideas and geeking out about new ideas.
Yeah.
So I feel like if your passion is learning, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think that's a great way to frame it. And, and of course, like I also try to remind myself, despite, my current age or, in 10 years, how old I'll be or whatever, it's like, it's all an experiment. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to refine it down to, I'm always impressed with people who feel like, nope, this is the thing I'm doing and I'm good. Like, I don't need anything else. Like cause I'm not wired that way. So I'm always impressed to hear people come at things like that. But for me, maybe I'll still be experimenting for the rest of my life until, and that's not, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just my journey.
I think so. And I think like if instead of feeling like you should have somebody else's journey, you can be excited about what's exciting to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then there might be more that you can uncover and discover within that. Because there are people who are sort of think like, I have this passion and I'm just not dogmatic about this passion and I have an obsession about it. And then I become Quentin Tarantino, right? Like, and then we look at Quentin Tarantino, we're like, oh my God, he's rich and he's prolific. So like, let's be that.
Right.
And then that becomes sort of the standard. But I feel like maybe that's a little bit like deciding that we should all have the same body type when clearly we don't.
Right.
And so then we all go to the gym for too long and then we starve ourselves or whatever, or go get plastic surgery to have a body type that simply is not ours because somebody else has idealized it as the one that we should have.
Right.
When truthfully, I have lots of friends who geek out on learning, and they're some of the most incredible and alive and passionate people that I know.
Yeah. Cool.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would embrace it. I think you should embrace it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just thinking like, okay, do we want to both take another 3 hours just to keep talking about all this?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
Great.
No, I feel
great.
you. Yeah, no, I feel you. Yeah, I feel you.
It's
That's
awesome.
your way of saying like, calm down, Audrey, calm down.
No, to talk to a fellow passionate person is always exciting. And I think, I remember, having teachers like this, you cannot help but become a little bit more excited about the topic when you're talking to somebody who's like, I always equate it to like if somebody's telling me about a car battery, but they are super excited about it.
Yeah, right.
I'm just like, wow, they're drawing me in. Like, this is kind of cool. And I think, if there's like to add to the world, if there's something else we can add, if we can add more passion to people's lives, then we're doing our job, we can't have too much out there. Well, thank you again so much for all your time. This has been really, really great.
Awesome. I appreciate you.
Hey guys, Nathan here one more time. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss anything ahead. Be sure to visit workingactorsjourney.com for additional info and links for items mentioned in today's episode, as well as all the episodes. You can follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All the links are on our site and in the episode notes. Become a premium member and enjoy additional benefits and perks of the show starting at just $2 per month. Head over to workingactorsjourney.com/premium to join the Working Actors community. Thanks again to today's guest and to everyone that makes these episodes possible. And a special thanks to you for listening. I'm Nathan Agan, and enjoy the journey.